Barabara kabisa, mtazamaji unaendelea kutazama Ukumbi. Tunazamia mada yetu kuhusiana na mabadiliko ya tabia nchi. Kongamano linaendelea hapa jijini Nairobi, litakuwepo kwa siku 3 mpaka tarehe 6 Jumatano. Na hivi sasa napata mwelekeo kwamba tuelekee katika ukumbi wa KICC tuweze kusikiza mawili matatu yanayotokea sehemu ile, halafu tuweze kuwa na wazungumzaji kuweza kujibu na kuweza kutoa maoni yao pia kuhusiana na yale yanayoendelea.
Minister, thank you so much. Your clarity around debt, around the complexity of some of these de-risking instruments is spot on. But the idea of the natural capital asset recognition, I wanted to ask, are you getting a lot of support for that?
We are very supportive of this. It's very important because, as the President of Kenya said earlier, we have significant potential in carbon sink. But natural capital accounting is very low, and it's also not recognized by international financial architecture for debt repayment and also for de-risking capital for climate projects. And so we are very supportive of the need for the world to recognize the natural capital which we have so much in assets, in order for us to use that in debt repayment and also to reduce the cost of capital in our continent.
I think it's brilliant, Minister. Thank you. And to pass over to Dr. Monique, I'm very interested in understanding other innovations which have come out of the continent where you are seeing this type of leadership, this type of pioneering around financial innovation, and interested in your reflections.
Thank you so much. The African Union, of course, is driving this vision for the continent of a prosperous, integrated and peaceful continent, and putting people at the center. So I will start by actually recollecting what we have heard this morning, that Africa is a solutions powerhouse for saving the climate, and that we need to transform all these natural resources into an asset class that investors are actually willing to invest in. And for that, our youthful workforce, our women, our men, our millions of SMEs are just awaiting this opportunity to be given a chance actually to transform the wealth of Africa into an opportunity for growth. And some of the things that we are achieving on the continent is to come stronger as a strong continent, speaking with one voice and having that audience in the global arena. I'm seeing that happening a lot. And I'm seeing us coming up with frameworks, normative frameworks, that we need our member states to domesticate more. I don't want to give the details because my sister, Commissioner Josepha, earlier this morning, have highlighted some of those frameworks. But we need to continue really speaking with one voice, especially when it comes to making sure climate finance works for us. The African Union has organized itself into 3 commissioners when it comes to, into commissions when it comes to climate issues. We have the Congo Basin Commission, we have a commission for island states, and we have a commission for the Sahel. We are seeing more and more cohesion getting on board within those commissions. And this is something that we needed to encourage because, sincerely, no single country will make it alone. We have to get together, stick strong together, and the African Union institutions, the Commission, the organs, the Pan-African Development Financial Institutions, the regional economic communities, we all need to come together and support our member states. We need to put our expertise together. So that is the effort that the African Union Commission is driving to coordinate all this capacity we have on the continent. We have a risk capacity, we have the AEDB, we have a Flexing Bank. All of these, we should really make it work for our member states. Then I'm seeing also progress in corporate and economic and political governance. You know that we have APRM. We are trying really to improve on this ground. Of course, progress here, but also challenges there. This is something that we need to enhance so that we have transparency and accountability prevail. I'm seeing also African Union and its institutions getting stronger and stronger. And this is a call from me to our partners to trust us more. And also a call to our member states to empower us more so that we can support this one Africa's position. Because as I said, no one country is able to make it alone. So it's through empowering these structures that our member states have put in place. They are contributing into those structures. So we need this to be pursued even more. Last but not least, I'm seeing really that taking ownership to invest in infrastructure. This is one area we still have a long way to go. But again, we have a strong architecture for that. We have PIDA, we have other instruments. My sister Commissioner Amani, she's there. She's driving that for the continent. But we need really to keep doing more of that so that we can unlock potential on our continent. Maybe I stop here. I may come back when you call me. Thank you.
Brilliant, thank you. And the point of cohesion is very inspiring to be here today. You asked for trust and support from partners, and I wonder that's a very nice segue to go to you, Jennifer, because of course we know that Germany has looked to align its international financial flows with a Paris climate agenda, and so I wanted to get your reflections on this conversation.
Yeah, it's very, very important that we value partnerships and partnerships that are mutually respectful. We have Agenda 2063, which is anchoring all that we are doing on the continent. And we don't need to reinvent the wheel. And it's from this agenda that other frameworks that are sectoral in nature are deriving and actually declining in more details what is meant by that. We are now evaluating the 10 years of what we have achieved within that agenda. We are coming up with the next 10 years plan, which is going to be having also a costing framework. We are reviewing into our flagship projects, of which projects like Anga, Dam, and others in this area are prominent. So we want all the considerations to be aligned to that. And also we want the financing to channel through African institutions. We have our African Development Bank, that is an implementing agency of the Union. We have a Flexim Bank and many others in the regional blocks that we need to unlock this financing through the same. Again, we need the African Union to take agency of all of that discussion and consolidating the African Union voice. We don't think that parallel systems are going to help us. So that's what we are talking in terms of alignment. Thank you.
Brilliant, and you mentioned not reinventing the wheel, and I know, Jennifer, that's something that you have looked at, scaling what works. We'd love to hear from you.
Yeah, first of all, just a huge congratulations to the African Union and to Kenya for this amazing conference. I'm so excited and privileged to be here. And I think you mentioned trust. I think trust comes through action, not just words. And I think in Germany we are trying to do our part in that, whether it be through our own climate finance, whether it be through things like the Green Climate Fund and increasing our contribution there and hoping that others come along. But also in listening to the panel earlier and what Minister KICC said about needing to do climate finance in the context of the African context of financing. So Another instrument that has been mentioned a little bit is on debt swaps. And so actually here at the conference, Germany's announcing that we are doing a climate debt swap with Kenya for 60 million euros, and they will have that funding to be able to invest in sustainable agriculture, in renewable energy for Kenya. And I think that's an example of the type of thing we need to do, a small contribution on that. Also on the de-risking, and I just, everything that was said from His Honorable Minister from Ghana on the de-risking and the reform side of things as well. I think Germany's trying to move forward there. One piece that maybe I can contribute, which is a little different, is on kind of what are the signals that investors are needing. So, I mean, we need to be looking, and we are looking much more actively in the cost of capital and the de-risking and the guarantees, and I'm so interested in listening to what specifically is needed, because we need to get all the different instruments. I think that's part of the complexity, right, is to be looking at the goal and then the different instruments. But our experience in Germany on the renewable side, for example, is that by having long, loud legal signals and policies in place, that has been what has been driving the investment in. So I think what President Ruto put forward in his speech this morning, but other countries that have put those in place and are putting those in place, I think that will also assist along with these financial instruments, because that will then give the private sector the confidence that they can stay. So those are some of the areas that we're working on, and I have to depart quickly. Look for an exciting announcement from President Ruto briefly. So I'm going to go listen in on that. Thank you so much, though.
Thank you, Jennifer. Pleasure to have you with us. Just to make the segue, I know that we've got the Minister from Namibia in the front row here as well, and I understand Germany has been looking at Namibian green hydrogen, and that is an example of what you just said. So great, made the segue. Now, Minister, you referred earlier to this challenge and complexity of these de-risking instruments. We know that, Baholo, you've obviously called for better blended finance, and you've looked at this in a context of investment and trade, and I'd love to understand what you think we need here to scale up better blended finance and unlock the capital that we're talking about.
Thanks, Catherine. It was interesting earlier, we had a conversation about successful countries in attracting climate finance, and in my opinion, there hasn't been any success for an African country in attracting climate finance. And I say this because if we look at the 2020 figures collectively, the continent only attracted, I think it's about 30 billion out of a total of $940 billion that was climate finance in the world. And that's only 11 or 12% of what the continent needs in order to adequately invest in NDCs or any other climate finance projects in the continent. So if we're looking at the gap that exists in finance, we cannot rightfully say that there has been a success in attracting climate finance in the continent. But that said, going back to your question of what needs to be done and how can we ensure that we are attracting finance, there is another controversial statement that says it doesn't matter what we do. Finance will flow where it feels most at home, and this conversation, I found it quite controversial in London, where a financier said, we do not know anyone in Africa. So we're not going to invest in the continent. And this takes us back to decades long of work we've done in investment attraction along the lines of the World Investment Report or along the lines of the Doing Business Report. We're doing all of the enabling environment reforms, and many African countries have come up with these and still is trailing in relation to investment attraction to Southeast Asia versus maybe even Latin America in some cases. And when we go back to it, investors say it's an issue of risk, right? So in thinking about how do we reduce risk, the previous panel spoke to this. And in addition to that, I wanted to say perhaps for member states, central governments, private investors, public investors to work towards consolidating a credit risk-sharing mechanism and sharing the data that exists. We know what Afrexim is doing. We know AFC is here. They are thriving. They are somehow managing to reduce the risk that is associated with investing in the continent, and therefore could share that data and information with international financiers so they are more comfortable with investing in the continent. We have AAA-rated institutions, to Madam DCP's point, that should be used to channel investment into the continent. So I don't think just going back to the issue of let's create an enabling environment as we've been doing for decades, and yet we haven't received the right investment attraction is the only way to go. But in addition to that, I think specifically for climate finance, we've been looking at NDCs and looking at the enhanced transparency framework, and countries that have made some strides have ensured that the NDCs are closely linked to investment plans, and that the investment plans are very clear, and they are creating space for private sector, and they are making space for, through credit enhancement, for the private sector to feel that there's reduced political risk, but also reduced project financing risk. So project origination is a very important thing to do, and to that end, I want to plug a project that we've been working on under the leadership of the UNDSG and the COP27 climate champion, Dr. Mahmoud, he's somewhere here. We did the UN Compendium of Climate Projects to prove that there are climate projects in the continent that can enable not only green industries, but can ensure that there's development. So policy needs to show that interconnectedness if we are to attract the right impact climate finance in the continent.
I want to come back to this sort of sense of frustration, actually. You've had a request, strengthen enabling environment, include these policies, set these NDCs, commit to transition plans, and you're still saying that people, investors, will not deploy capital because of the perception of risk. Did I hear you correctly?
Yes, in some part. I mean, it's a frustration. It's not necessarily to say there's no progress, but we need a complete overhaul of the global financial infrastructure. And this is a conversation that I know is being had quite widely. You know, we need to see different IFIs and MDBs playing their role in creating space and showing that this perceived risk that has been associated with the continent is actually false, because default rates are not as high as they have been put out to be. There is data on this, I just don't happen to have it at the moment, but there is data that points to this. And I certainly think if you look at, say, default rates in Latin America, they're higher than for the continent, and yet the attraction of climate investment in 2020 for the Americas from the private sector sits at 49%, while for the continent is only 14%.
Well, it's wonderful that Secretary Kerry could hear that challenge as well around really the over-perception of risk, because I know he's pioneering a number of these blended instruments to tackle that risk. And it is my privilege to invite our private sector voice on this panel to weigh in. How are you looking at the continent? What does this conversation of risk feel like? And are you thinking about opportunities when you look at different countries here?
Sure. I mean, a lot has been said, and more eloquently than I could have, so I've torn up my notes, and I'm going to speak ad hoc. Let me start by telling you who Helios is. Helios is one of Africa's largest focused private equity funds. We've been around for 20 years. We've invested $4 billion of equity and raised about $5 billion of debt over that period. We've invested and built businesses in sectors ranging from agriculture, consumer goods, telecom, infrastructure, real estate to fintechs. Along the journey, we have actually monetized a whole range of international capital through dividend recaps, high financings, refinancings, green bonds, real estate investment trust structures. We've sold to multinationals, we've sold to foreign private equity funds. We've actually listed 3 of our businesses, African businesses, on the FTSE 250. So we've mobilized at the end of the journey, once we've built companies of scale, real international capital at scale. So that's, I think, who we are and what we do. And on the climate front, we've done quite a bit. We've been a big investor in seeds, fertilizers, so a lot on the agricultural front, vertically integrated consumer goods companies. We've built Africa's largest commercial and industrial energy business called Starsight, which is now about 400 megawatts of solar and battery power across a range of countries. So we've done a lot of innovative things in climate. That's Helios, and we've delivered returns, risk-adjusted, attractive for our investors, and our investors are a whole range of local and international capital, global, DFIs and commercial. So we've delivered returns and high impact, and by impact, I think in the past we looked at it always as gender, jobs, carbon mitigation, etc., and financial inclusion. As we look forward, and we'll take a step back actually, before I look forward. Take a step back and just look at where the global market is. I mean, we've had, well, what creates policy change? You need awareness first, then you need planning, and then you need action. And there's a lot of frustration because the awareness comes and goes, the planning comes and goes, and the action is sporadic. And I keep hearing that as we sort of flop from COP to COP. But I think the awareness is going up. If you just think about the fact that in California today, houses are uninsurable. You've just had a massive tragedy in Hawaii. So awareness is, it's no longer Africa is vulnerable, and Africa is really in need of adaptation help and investment. I think this is a serious problem everywhere. And climate change knows no borders. I think that is becoming very apparent to the Americans.
Wataalam wa masuala ya kukabiliana na mabadiliko ya tabia nchi wakizungumza pembezoni